the corporations that build these AI tools, I think is a really important thing to look at. I think actually the entire example of Sam Altman being ousted and then being pulled back in OpenAI is, I think,
let's talk about it.
I think it's actually quite scary to me, because what it shows to me is that they started out with the intent, let's have different perspectives within our organization so that we can make sure that those push against each other and we find a common ground that works. What they seem to have succeeded at is inviting those different perspectives into their organization. What they seem to have failed at is integrating those different perspectives into effective decision-making to move forward, so that those decisions, those opposing views together, make a better outcome. They have expelled the opposing voice. First they expelled one opposing voice, Sam Altman out, and then they expelled the other opposing voice, the people from the board.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Ryan Merrill, founder of Global Mangrove Trust and Chief Impact Officer at Handprint Tech. I'm here this morning with Joost Schouten. Joost is joining me from New Zealand. Joost is the founder of Nestor.io and a reformed engineer. That's not really true, is it? But Joost, you and I have had a series of conversations over the course of this week about self-organization and systems for creating better decision-making. And also we've reflected a lot on what AI has done for our understanding about what is possible in terms of how we organize groups of people and decision-making systems writ large. I'd like to ask you, just to take us right back in, just how do you think of self-organization as a backdrop, or as a sort of a framing set of attention for understanding AI and general AI, advanced AI, and what it can do for society? What does self-organization do in terms of orienting our thinking to the AI space?
I think self-organization, and I can't predict the future, so I'm not quite sure where exactly that's going to lead. My hope is that self-organization can be a set of tools that can create boundaries for our AI to function within. Because there's a lot to explore about self-organization, but at the highest level, what it does, it creates a set of rules and some boundaries for people to come together to work in pursuit of purpose. Now I want AI to do the same. I want to make sure that when we employ AI, it serves our collective needs, and those needs need to be made explicit so that we can assess if it does or if it doesn't. And if it doesn't, it shouldn't be given any autonomy or authority to act. Right? Because that's somewhat dystopian to me. I think AI should serve our collective needs, and otherwise it shouldn't do anything. So that's roughly an eagle's eye view where I see the relationship and the opportunities.
I understand the same, that our experience in self-organizing organizations, self-organizing systems like DAOs, collectives, and teams are an incredible microcosm and training ground for creating rules, like you said, guidelines, principles, and sort of systems for managing decision-making, right? But also resource allocation, power and legitimacy. And all of these topics, resource allocation, power and legitimacy, and decision-making, are all coming up very fast and very strong vis-a-vis AI globally. You've written a lot about self-organization in theory and in practice. Could you maybe share with our audience a little bit about where you see self-organization being employed today most effectively?
Hmm. Well, first of all, it's comparatively still quite small for what is and it isn't. Right? If you look at conventional companies or organizations, most of them use some form of management hierarchy. Like that's kind of the de facto choice if you don't make a choice. Board, like shareholders, board, CEO, executives, managers, and people doing the work, like real simplification. And then there are a whole heap of organizations that are experimenting with different ways of doing it. And often there's different reasons to try that out. Some of them are just a collective that doesn't want to have an authority structure where someone is the boss. They really, like a communal living space, for example. There it makes sense to have shared agreements that are really carried throughout that community. But there's also more and more commercial organizations that realize that self-organization is actually a better way to integrate all relevant perspectives in pursuit of the organizational purpose, whatever that might be. So where do I see that employed? It's not necessarily a single industry, but it does seem to show up a bit more in different cultures. Like I'm Dutch. That's where I have a lot of my network. But it also seems to be a country and a culture where self-organization is quite is more popular than you might see it in let's say the States. And I'm not quite sure why. I can guess, but that's not necessarily my background. But I do see that that's usually more informative where you see self-organization show up. What are what's the cultural acceptance of listening to more voices in collective decision making, rather than it's a certain industry or something.
That's really helpful, and it maybe encourages us to take a quick step back and talk about hierarchical organizations. What we have when we're not working with some self-organizing principles, we're working with hierarchical principles, and we're thinking about AI and what AI is going to be learning in application across societies. Where do you see the biggest challenges from hierarchy emerging vis-a-vis AI? Why is hierarchy so important to understand when we think about emergent AI?
It's because there's actually a couple of elements to hierarchy, but I'm going to speak to the management hierarchy specifically, where one of the damaging characteristics of a management hierarchy is that there is a direction, a top to down direction, and little bottom up direction, where many voices and relevant voices don't get heard. Now with that pattern as a predominant pattern, specifically in all the materials that AI is being trained on, is going to inform how AI looks at decision making. It is to a large extent the bias for collective decision making, unless we tell it otherwise, right? And what that means is that there is a few people in authority that get to set out most of the direction and decision making at the expense of many voices that are, by definition, very relevant to make a society work for everybody that makes part of it.
Let's flesh it out a little bit, because when we were talking about this earlier in the week, it really felt to me that your work in looking at hierarchical systems versus self-organization or self-organizing systems was incredibly relevant in terms of what our market economies and the way in which we organize work is informing AI. And you have shared with me, and in your written work, you've shared some principles or some guidelines that you've articulated are super important for self-organizing systems to work well. So before we talk about what those mean for AI, maybe it would be helpful if we could lay those out. So to ask the question, if you were to pick, say, 3 of the really important principles that guide an effective self-organizing team or system, what might those be?
Um, there's a bunch of different angles, but maybe I'll just really speak to my own experience. So speak to what motivates me to do this work, and then how that is being expressed. Because at the basis of it is a drive for a fair society for all that make up that society. And to get there, you need to have a pathway for everyone to process achieving their needs in whatever organization they're a part of. So that really means, and this is something where I carry a lot of passion, is it needs to be inclusive, and it needs to be representative. And not necessarily by that we need to top-down design what representative looks like. No, representative as a result of a systemic change where everyone's voice has to get integrated. And there I see that the top-down hierarchies in our organizations, but even at larger scale, often representative democracies, have a lot of challenges. So we can, with some social innovation through self-organization, but also through technical innovation, we can actually do a lot better today than we ever could. Yet we seem to be replicating the old patterns of management hierarchy with centralized authority to the detriment of a large set of our of society.
You've given us inclusiveness and you've given us representation, which will feel similar to many minds, but there's a distinction between the two. So let's take a moment. When we think about principles or goals that we would like to see emerging widely, and maybe emerging widely because they're being reinforced or valued by AI systems, how would you distinguish between inclusiveness and representativeness? Is there a distinction?
I'm not quite sure. I guess it depends on the practical application.
Well, that's all right. So inclusiveness, representativeness, let's call it representation, right, as a value in self-organizing systems. You feel that has a specific or a particular value for AI-driven systems or AI-driven patterns. Could you elaborate on that? How might representation manifest ideally as a pathway to a benevolent AI?
Yeah. So when you look at it from, I see many of these conversations that are around representation and inclusiveness that come from a design perspective on, okay, what does that mean? Real bluntly, does it mean we need to have 50-50 men, women, or like other characteristics that people show up? And I like to step away from that a little bit and really look at it from an organizational perspective, that all voices, no matter how loud, have a pathway to show up and are explicitly invited into the conversation, not because they open their mouth, but just because of the systemic solution that makes sure that there's a pathway for you to speak up. Because if we don't, we never get to hear the voices we don't hear. So those currently designing the system, that's the view we get to see in what we're building today. And this is really where self-organization can show up, because it by design, and we can talk a little bit about how that works specifically, integrates all relevant perspectives. in pursuit of our collective needs or in pursuit of our purpose. By means, and maybe to get practical, is one really wonderful tool for that is consent decision making. Right. So rather than in a management hierarchy where there's just like a central figure that makes an authoritarian decision, you can also, in what you often see in communities, is consensus decision making. We all agree, or we have a majority vote to agree on something. Where consent decision making, which is explicitly something from self-organization, the decision making is slightly different. Where you say, do you see harm in the decision that's being proposed? Which all of a sudden really biases towards let's quickly make a decision. Let's really invite people to move forward. But if there is harm from your perspective, speak up so that we can integrate it. That doesn't stop us moving forward, but we integrate the harmful perspective to make sure that that harm doesn't arise. If it stays neutral, that's fine, because somebody else sees a path forward. And that's really where this inclusiveness and diversity really shows up in a systemic way, because if there is the space for you to speak when you see harm, you will speak up because you're passionate about that. That needs to be facilitated so that you also feel safe enough to open your mouth, right? So there's a lot of work to be done. But I think that's such an important pattern that needs to be part of how we design our AI systems, or actually our organizations, but also specifically here AI, so that all voices are being represented in however it shows up or however it is employed.
Let's unpack that a little bit, because here I think we're beginning to arrive at a pathway to benevolent AI, which is our mandate. That's our mission. That's our theme. That's why we're here. That's why I'm here. So fairness, representation, and an attention or reinforcing an enablement of consent decision making, those are all attributes of self-organization that could inform best practice or principles of development in and around AI programming or AI learning or AI applications that might constitute a pathway to benevolent superintelligence. So let's talk about how we get there. So when we think about, or maybe I'll invite you to speculate a little bit about sort of the vectors of application, where in society and in the economy do you think enhanced incorporation of these principles of fairness, representation, and consent decision-making might have the most immediate and material effect on the trajectory of AI development?
Incentive structures for the corporations that build these AI tools, I think, is a really important thing to look at. I think actually the entire example of Sam Altman being ousted and then being pulled back in OpenAI is, I think,
let's talk about it.
I think it's actually quite scary to me, because what it shows to me is that and I don't know the ins and outs, so maybe I use it as an example to make a point for my point, but I think there's some parallels in that they started out with the intent, let's have different perspectives within our organizations so that we can make sure that those push against each other and we find a common ground that works. What they seem to have succeeded at is inviting those different perspectives into their organization. What they seem to have failed at is integrating those different perspectives into effective decision-making to move forward so that those decisions, those opposing views together make a better outcome. They have expelled the opposing voice. First, they expelled one opposing voice, Sam Altman, out, and then they expelled the other opposing voice, the people from the board. That doesn't spell a lot of that doesn't sit so well with me. That doesn't give me a lot of trust that now they are capable of of integrating the voice of ethical AI versus growing and building the tech out. Maybe they're still going to make that happen.
Or maybe highlights the limitations of having one without the other. Representation without decision making, anyway, it's the idea, it's not representation, right? Representation without actual power or impact, right? It's sort of maybe not the same thing. I'm sure if we had a political theorist here with us, they would clarify exactly where the line is between full representation that manifests into decision making and the kind of representation is sort of like, you can raise your voice, but no one will listen. And yet you've made the point that the decision making systems of these companies is a really important area for society to be encouraging these principles of equitable, fair, representative, and maybe consensus-driven decision-making. The companies that are developing AIs, as opposed to elementary schools, we're saying, no, it's these firms that are a really important testing ground for these principles of organization, because within these firms, those principles of organization have the most manifest effect on the evolution of the technology itself in this sort of nascent pupa stage, right? Everybody expects AI is going to find itself on the internet, train itself, redesign itself, and become something very different very soon. AI on its own in the wild will evolve beyond us. So one of the things that we've observed in the space over the last several weeks and months is the emergence of an opportunity to employ AI to produce training data sets for itself, which some folks have heralded as another step towards the emergence of advanced general intelligence. Some folks have said, no, this is just a cost-saving measure that allows us to have better visibility and test more quickly and learn more quickly. Maybe they're saying the same thing, maybe not. But in both cases, AI is increasingly able to produce the universe in which it learns. And that means that its opportunity to extrapolate from the social patterns that it started with and to use those social patterns to learn and to grow is increasing at a nonlinear rate. So against that backdrop, maybe you could share with me once again where you see hierarchies and hierarchical decision-making systems like we see in market economies and we see in companies as creating real challenges for the emergence of a benevolent AI.
Well, I guess that comes down to what are the incentives guiding this AI and perhaps benevolent AI to grow? Like, in what direction is that growing, and who's incentivizing that growth? What is it serving? And my worry is that the context within which the fastest growing AI tools and employments are happening right now are commercial context where either the explicit or implicit purpose is maximizing return on invest by XYZ, by building profitable AI models. Those incentives are going to drive what this AI is going to do, explicit or implicitly, right? So we have to incorporate different perspectives there. If we don't do that at that level, because that's exactly what our organizations do today, right? Or like there's lots of wonderful, fast-moving organizations doing beautiful things, but often to the detriment of a large subset of society by either wealth inequality or depletion of natural resources, or whatever that might be. My worry is that AI is going to exacerbate this zero-sum game unless we incentivize it to serve our collective needs. And this is really where I see the role of self-organization, because it has a couple of tools to integrate all relevant perspectives in pursuit of our collective purpose. These organizations are not set up to do that today. I think the example what Sam Altman shows is exactly that they're not capable of integrating perspectives. They have done what most organizations do and expel the weaker difference that shows up. That's worrisome. That's worrisome to me.
I think that's really helpful to appreciate the shortcomings of hierarchical-based systems, which we have so many of, for managing situations where there's a lot of uncertainty, where there's emerging risk, and when the perspectives of non-owners are potentially very valuable. That the incentive sets of the owners of the profit streams may take you very rapidly in the wrong direction. I maybe want to pivot to ask you about a piece of theory that you've been toying with. And I want to make sure I get this right. So correct me if I'm on the wrong, if I articulate this incorrectly. But you have espoused a decision rule in your work on self-organizing systems about how people within teams should make decisions and when they should be able to move forward with decisions. And I'd like you to articulate that. And then you've nuanced it and you've said, but when AI is used as an agent, we kind of need to invert this decision rule. And that's a neat dyad. And I think it's helpful for people. It illustrates a little bit about how self-organizing systems and theory can inform AI development, but then in practice actually needs to be modified. And so maybe we could start with the first part and then advance to the second. So can you tell us a little bit about this decision rule idea that you've articulated among other theorists for self-organizing systems?
Yeah, so in the management hierarchy, which we're accustomed to, generally speaking, when you're in the management hierarchy, when you make a decision that's beyond a certain scope, the default is ask permission or don't do it, right? So, and in self-organization, that's flipped on its head. It says, do anything you deem needed in pursuit of expressing your role, unless it's explicitly said you can't. Right. So there really is the idea: do whatever you need to do to further your work. There's lots of trust in you as a role filler doing work to move things forward and take all the authority you need, unless there's an explicit agreement says that you can't. So that's part of self-organization. It's a bit of an entrepreneurial mantra that shows up when you are working with an AI agent. I would like to flip that back on its head, almost as if you're in a management hierarchy again, right? So if you have an autonomous agent show up, I would not want that AI agent to act unless I have granted it explicit authority to do so on my behalf. And I think on my role's behalf, right? So I think it's really important, and I was just having an interesting conversation with a couple of other people online about this, that when AI agents are being employed, I think it's and maybe that looks different in the future, but for now, I think it's crucially important that people in roles are held to account to what the AI agent does. Because if not, are corrective systems or corrective tools. If I screw something up, and I've screwed it up a couple of times, be it in a management hierarchy or be it in a self-organized team, I probably should leave that organization, right? If I screw up enough times and I don't learn. There's no accountability with AI if you don't watch out.
That's the risk. Cool, because when you articulate it in the beginning, it smarts of like AI must be subordinate, and that's the only way it can work, which is wonderfully parochial, and yet you follow it up with a very strong argument for why that would be the case. Let me try to restate what you've gotten at, right? That in a self-organizing system, which distinctly from a hierarchical system that many of us are used to, the working logic is, do what you can and what you will, so long as it doesn't contravene the organizational mission. You have broad latitude of action, being bounded only by your understanding of the sort of published and aligned organizational mission. And yet you feel that with AI agents, there's a real tension in providing that level of discretion, that level of agency and freedom to an AI agent, because it's a complete absence of accountability. The AI does not exist. The AI cannot be sued. It can't go to jail. It's, it's very challenging to fire one, right? Someone else will just spin it up at the next desk. So
it doesn't even care if you frown at it.
Yeah, you frown at bad AI. Oh, don't worry, just try me again. We've all seen this in working with ChatGPT or generative AI, and we just forgive all the mistakes and we move on in hopes that we get something better on the next spin. So maybe I could just invite you in this interim stage, right, to state again how you see an accountability rule manifesting to make it make us more able to employ AI as a limited agent within companies and within teams. Share with us again that accountability concept.
Well, so the wonderful thing is, again, within self-organization, there's really wonderful tools to deal with accountability, namely through clear and explicit governance, where we have explicit roles that are not functional roles, but really, there's a role with a couple of lines that says this is what you're accountable for. This is wonderful for AI to function within. But if it steps outside of those bounds and there needs to be corrective measure, I think we really need to fall back into people to be held to account for how that AI agent walks out of bounds, to correct what the AI agent does, not necessarily for a punitive measure, but to make sure that there's always someone on the lookout for how well the AI agent is still serving organizational purpose or collective needs. Because if we don't have that human checks and balances on everything that's happening, I worry, and time will tell, I worry that there is just a slow sliding scale to more and more AI leading us in an implicit direction rather than AI serving us in our explicit collective needs.
The challenge being that AI is replicable and scalable in its work output at a level that humans are not. So this is a big design tension. This is a massive tension to achieve. How does one achieve scalable accountability?
But I also see a scenario where AI is actually really good at drawing within the lines. I can already see that. And this is. I don't even think that self-organization per se is just a tool to keep AI in check. I equally think there's a massive opportunity where self-organization is what can set AI free, because it has the governance which makes explicit what is expected of the organization and unpacked into lots of detail, so that these AI agents really know what is expected of them. So I also foresee a future where one person could be held accountable for thousands of AI agents because they're actually generally really good until they're not. Until something happens and needs to be corrected. I think that accountability always needs to lie with people so that we can use our mechanisms of accountability in the human world to get that corrected. I can't predict the future. That might look different from now, but for now, I think we need to have human accountability.
That's compelling, and I think it's a very strong case that you've made. And I would like to maybe invite you to explore an extension, and maybe you can touch on some of the work at Nestor on where do you see the opportunities to employ AI as a job in managing systems of accountability, transparency, and empowerment of humans as referees to manage AI agents. How do you think AI can help create the context in which a human referee can provide effective oversight or guidance to AI agents at scale?
Yeah, so disclaimer, that's all a theoretical exercise, well, mostly theoretical exercise, because we're really at the starting point of playing with that. But the vision that we're striving for with Nestor is really built on what I shared before, where I believe self-organization is a wonderful tool to create the boundaries for AI to function within, but also the blueprint to do it really, really effectively. And what that means is that AI can help at a couple of levels, or at a couple of so one part that we've already deployed within Nestor is that the AI tools can help you craft your governance and sharpen it. Right, so it knows your complete set of governance, so your roles, accountabilities, your policies, and can, when you just say, hey, I need to do some work around design, it says, okay, well, here's a proposal for a role for designer, because you don't have one yet. Do you want me to propose that? And therein lies an important distinction, right? Because we could have it created automatically, but again, we really believe in that personal accountability. So it suggests, and then you can act on it. For now, perhaps in the future that can get automated. So that's one level on helping it shape our shared agreements. But those agreements are human to human or human to organization agreements, or role to role, if you really want to get specific. But then there is actually doing the work. So once governance is set up, I am accountable for a couple of roles, and in those roles I do projects. There might be a project writing a blog post about XYZ. This is really where these agents get wonderfully useful in collaboration tools. Just pick up that project and write that blog post. It can just do that. Still, the role is accountable, the human filling the role is accountable, but it now has a couple of agents helping you do that work. And there we're really elaborating. And again, I think self-organization is really, really useful because it has an explicit unpacking of organizational purpose into circles, roles that are really explicit around accountability, but also strategy. So it can, at all times, when you're doing the details of the grunt work of your organization, it knows everything. It has the complete eagle-eye view of the entire organization in a way that management hierarchy usually cannot. Because management hierarchy has an authority structure that primarily lives in your head. It's usually a social construct of my boss just makes a decision. Your boss holds a lot of that strategic clarity that the organization needs in their head in a way that self-organization doesn't, because it demands transparency so that we can rely on it and integrate relevant perspectives and differences. So self-organization really has a step forward, is a step ahead of management hierarchy in helping with the training data for AI to work, because we already have it. Like that's an explicit part of self-organization.
Thank you. I've started taking notes and enjoyed that very much, in that employment of AI systems in role definition itself. Initially in a proposal phase, but also in crafting governance systems, managing, maybe not, but certainly monitoring and informing. That's a very valuable application for AI solutions. Also in reform, ultimately, of governance systems. What it raises for me is ultimately the competition training ground of a global market economy. That, what one would aspire, what one might hope or speculate, is that organized applications of AI grounded on self-organizing decision principles could outcompete value-producing AI systems grounded in hierarchical decision-making systems. One would hope that at the end of the day, the ultimate accountability is in serving people's needs, which is what's done by market economies. And thus, I'm very interested in how your company evolves, because I would say that the competitive ramifications, right, and applications of having that thinking lattice of self-organizing principles and decision-making baked in to sort of the DNA of competitive value-producing AI systems is something to be looked at very carefully, and with some excitement. So thank you for sharing that as well.
It's been quite an interesting personal journey as well, because I think at the start of the year, I carried primarily anxiety around AI. Next to my engineer being somewhat excited about technology, but anxiety around the social implications. When I started really looking at the merging of AI with self-organization, I now also really carry the sense of an opportunity of bringing the concepts of self-organization and specifically the ability to integrate all relevant perspectives to a scale that is today impossible, but with AI, perhaps we can reach a way wider audience, because self-organization is the most effective way to employ AI. Like, that's the premise that we're testing here. And I don't know if it's true, but I really want it to be true. And I'm going to try to see if we can make that a reality. Because what it would mean is that not only can we use AI to make our life a lot more effective and efficient, but also in a way that way more voices get to be represented in the employment of AI, but also in our organizations, right? Because then all of a sudden, with these two hand in hand, I think we can build way more inclusive and representative organizations than we can today.
Joost, I want to say thanks. I think we've come to the end of our conversation for this morning. I'm going to have a cup of coffee and call you back. You and I can sit and chat for longer. I do want to say thanks. You've brought to me personally and to our audience a fresh breath of air from the theory of self-organization, from the principles of self-organization that can create better, more equitable, representative decision-making within teams. And you've made some strong arguments today about how self-organizing decision principles can make for better AI, can form a pathway to benevolent AI, and maybe to also create more competitive AIs, more successful AIs in creating value for society, which is an area I'd like to explore more with you in our next conversation.
Well, it's been a pleasure exploring this with you, and I look forward to continuing that journey with you and everyone interested.